Hello and welcome to Revenge of the Drive-In's YouTube channel. This is not something we normally do, but it just felt special because we are talking, of course, about the Blair Witch Mockumentaries that came out in relation to the original The Blair Witch Project film. I am Patrick, and I am joined here by...
I'll let my guest go first, or our guest go first.
My name is Feck.
What's up?
Is that normal? Did that sound good?
No, that was great.
Yeah,
I loved it.
Yeah,
I loved
that's
it.
great. Yeah, so Feck, you were on our Blair Witch Project episode, which we did with Face Off, and this other person was not.
He was
I'll let
not.
him introduce himself.
Oh no, the other person's me, Jim. Hello everybody. Hello Feck. Hello Patrick.
Hello.
How you doing there?
Same old. Yeah.
All right, so the three films, if we dare call them that, are Curse of the Blair Witch, which was actually released before the Blair Witch Project movie. It was aired on I have it written down as July 11th, 1999, on the Sci-Fi Network. This was back when Sci-Fi knew how to spell its own name.
Right.
Blair Witch Project was released later that month, and then in October of 1999 on... I guess this is a Blockbuster exclusive. We got another documentary that has multiple titles, but the title screen says Sticks and Stones.
Mm-hmm.
And then about a year later, we got the Burkittsville 7. So these are the three films in question.
So we're only talking about those three?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there is a documentary, of course, in that came out around the time of the second Blair Witch Project movie, Book of Shadows.
Yeah. I literally just rewatched that thinking it was going to be somehow.
I don't think Jim has seen Book of Shadows.
That's fine. That's fine.
That's okay,
Yeah.
but we can talk about it anyways.
All right, I actually like that one. It's kind of weird, but
The movie or the shadow of the Blair Witch?
the Shadow of the Blair
Yeah.
Witch. The movie is also kind of weird.
It's
More
very
than
weird.
kind of weird. But
Yeah.
didn't like it that much. I thought it was okay.
It's fun.
But yeah, we are fans of the original Blair Witch Project film. And in our episode, Feck, you talked a lot about these documentaries, and these are some things, at least in the case of The Curse of the Blair Witch, I had heard of, but I had never seen before, so I went out and saw them, and I am glad I did.
Yeah, it really adds like a whole new dimension to the Blair Witch Project, and it is kind of like a really cool little almost time capsule like glimpse into the late 90s, early 2000s, and stuff before internet culture, really, right?
Yeah, at the very beginning of it. That's one of the things I enjoyed most about it, seeing that Blockbuster logo come up for Sticks and Stones, a Blockbuster exclusive. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, so the first two documentaries, Curse of the Blair Witch and Sticks and Stones, which has a different title on IMDb. It's like an exploration of the Blair Witch legend or something like that.
Yeah.
These are almost the same documentary, and
Yeah.
that's kind of disappointing. But yeah, let's talk about, I guess, the two of these at once then. Why not? Because they're very similar.
I mean, the Curse of the Blair Witch is great. It adds so much to like the actual movie, and it's, because we commended the movie for being so realistic and everything, and I think this is very realistic in a different way because it's like a straight documentary with actual talking heads throughout. And I think it's really just as convincing as the actual movie is.
Yeah, the authenticity is paramount to both the film and this weird little television documentary, and it does feel so authentic. I mean, I haven't watched a lot of like true crime documentary type stuff, but kind of like the movie, they got actors who are really good or really good for their parts or whatever. I assume Tom Williams is Mike Williams' actual brother, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, because that's his real name and everything,
great.
which is that's fun. I assume, I mean, maybe not, but Rachel Meyer is probably Heather's actual friend in real life too, but I don't know.
Very possible.
Yeah, they didn't have as many pictures of those two together as kids. Well, I guess they didn't know each other as kids, so.
Yeah.
Now, what I do want to say about Curse of the Blair Witch and Sticks and Stones is that, Patrick, you've already kind of said that they're both the same documentary. Sticks and Stones is shorter and just kind of recut, right? But they do add some things into it, which make it less believable. than the actual longer 40-minute or 40-odd minute documentary. Like, I think in the opening...
Yeah.
In, like, the opening minute, they're, like, interviewing an old woman, and she's like, I don't believe in ghosts and vampires and communists. And then it cuts away, and I'm like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, that
like,
was...
started out so well.
That felt like a comedy line that didn't really belong. I agree with that. That is...
Communist.
She was not featured in The Curse of the Blair Witch, but that's some relative of one of Rustin Parr's victims. I have a Venn diagram out here on notes, going over all of the characters that appear in the films and which ones, and an awful lot of the talking heads are in both Curse and Sticks and Stones. But yeah, she's
speaking of
only in Sticks and Stones.
I know when we were talking about Blair Witch, you were a little skeptical about the fact that Rustin Parr is in Curse of the Blair Witch, but I think I kind of defended it. Said it was the guy they got was really good, so I was wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, that was pretty well done. Authentic enough feeling kind of newsreel footage, and he is Rustin Parr, not a talking head, obviously, because he's dead in the timeline of when the film comes out, but he is one of two characters that I have in the Venn diagram for all three. It's him and Bill Barnes, and Bill Barnes, of course, is just a delight. Bill Barnes is the old man, local historian of Burkittsville, who's kind of a kook.
Yeah, but the other old guy was good too. What was his name? I have it written down. Who's like the leader of the historical society?
That's Bill Barnes.
No, well, there's Charles Morehouse and
yeah, Morehouse is a professor.
Yes,
we'll just call him Leonard Nimoy, because that's who he looks like.
But those two are great because and it's this perfect History Channel-esque thing, right? If you flick on the History Channel anytime today, you will see some stupid bullshit documentary about fucking like I
was going to say this is more historical than the actual History Channel nowadays, so showing all that ancient alien stuff.
Well, exactly. I walked down the stairs yesterday, turned the TV on, and there was a fucking documentary about the Wendigo and how the national parks of Canada and America and Mexico were created to corral Wendigos. Like, what the fuck am I watching?
Sure.
But this was great because you have, like, these two characters. You have Charles Morehouse saying something like, oh, all the stuff in this book from the 1800s is absolute nonsense. And then it hard cuts to...
The Blair Witch cult, yeah.
Yeah. And then it hard cuts to...
Bill Barnes.
Yeah, thank you. And he's like, I think everything in this book is positively true. You know, and it's like, that's the same, like, that's done so well, and that's the same fucking shit you see on TV today.
I noticed difference in the editing of the two movies, Curse and Sticks and Stones. In Curse, they allow more time to pass between Morehouse saying that it's mostly BS, or entirely BS, and then for Bill Barnes to say that it's pretty accurate. In Sticks and Stones, it's like immediate. He's like, "Don't believe a word of it; it's all fiction." Then it cuts to Bill Barnes. He's like, "And it's pretty true. Most of it." Yeah. So again, Sticks and Stones has a little bit of that kind of comedy to it, just a tiny bit, because you mentioned the ghosts and vampires and communists line. There's just like a little bit of that there that's not in Curse, and I actually think that's part of what makes Curse feel more authentic.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think Bill Barnes, not to derail this, but Bill Barnes is really important because, you know, the sequel is Book of Shadows, but no spoilers. There's like, we don't know what that means by the end of the movie, why it's called Book of Shadows. We only find that out in the documentary because Bill Barnes tells us what it is.
Oh, in that other documentary. Yeah.
In the
Shadow of the Blair Witch.
Yeah. So it's like, even in the movie that is titled Book of Shadows, we don't know what the hell that means until the documentary where they like explicitly. So it's like weird that they did it that way, but that's Bill Barnes very important for that reason.
Well, Bill Barnes is important in other Blair Witch media, of course, because in addition to these documentaries, there were several books written about the Blair Witch, and I have two of them here, if I can find them in my mess of a room, in my Bill Barnes Historical Society-esque room here. But one of them is all like outlining the investigation, specifically with Buck Buchanan, who appears in both Curse and Sticks and Stones. He's the private investigator hired by Heather Donahue's mother, and him like retracing all these steps, talking to all these people. There's a lot of differences between it and the documentary, but what it kind of he revisits like all of these featured players here. Bill Barnes is a big part. The priest who appears in the Burkittsville 7, or the former priest, whatever his name is, he appears in that book. Yeah, so it's really interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the mythology of, I guess, really of the Curse of Blair Witch, because this is stuff that, in fact, I think you described it as, this is essentially, the Curse of the Blair Witch is essentially the documentary that Heather was trying to make in the Blair Witch Project that became the Blair Witch Project. So this really is an outline of kind of the history, the fake history, obviously, of this town and of this Blair Witch figure. And most of it doesn't make it into the actual movie, but we've got several key things. First of all, we've got Ellie Kedward's the witch, who's also known as Ellie Kedward. She gets banished. She dies. A year later, kids who accused her of witchcraft go missing. That's in the late 1700s.
Yeah.
Then the next thing is, so Blair, rather, is abandoned. Eventually, Burkittsville is founded on the same site. And then the next big thing is the Eileen Treacle incident.
That the two fishermen tell us about.
Yes, yeah. I was going to ask if this was, because most of what makes it into the movie, or I should say most of what, kind of the most interesting mythology stuff that makes it into the actual movie is all the Rustin Parr stuff. But this other stuff, it's not entirely new information, but it's certainly fleshed out a lot more in these documentaries. The first two, because Burkittsville 7 is entirely focused on Rustin Parr and the aftermath of that.
Well, that's what's cool about the documentary, because the movie itself is like guided by the mythology, but never outright stated in full for the most part. Mm-hmm. Like, even the Rustin Parr stuff, which is like the most we get, is still not that much, and it's in the very beginning of the movie.
Yeah, very beginning.
I'm sure, most people who watch that movie probably have no idea that that's like the Rustin Parr house at the end. It's just a old house, because it's like you wouldn't remember.
That's actually something I wanted to talk about. That is something, the house itself, in the documentaries, it's unclear what the house actually is at the end of the footage, because obviously a lot of the people talking, Sheriff Ronald Cravens, for instance, thinks that the footage found is a hoax. Yes, I assume that's why he's named that.
He is named after Wes Craven.
Okay. And then, and the former priest is, his name is Cazal, so is he named after Fredo? I don't know.
Probably.
but yeah, so one thing, I actually think it's the most interesting information that comes out of any of these documentaries, or at least from the first two, is the information about how the footage was found and where it was found, because obviously none of that's in the movie, because it hasn't happened yet. So, but it's like this weird, in fact, you talked about this like weird kind of time loop thing with the Blair Witch stuff, which again isn't really in the movie. It can be interpreted in a way, but here makes it pretty explicit. The footage is found underneath a house in like undisturbed soil that hasn't been disturbed for centuries, and yet it's not clear yet in these documentaries that is Rustin Parr's house, but it is made clear that Rustin Parr's house has burned down.
Right.
So no real explanation is offered as to what house they're in. The closest thing we get to it is in the Burkittsville 7, when the guy talks about, this is in Rustin Parr's house. He doesn't refer to the movie. He refers to crime scene photographs, but he talks about the writing on the walls, which we see in the movie in the final scene. So I think that's really interesting stuff.
But the footage is found underneath Rustin Parr's house, right? It's just burned down. Like that's
but I don't think they say that in the documentaries. No, and in fact, again,
I think
Sorry,
what they
go ahead,
actually
Jim.
say is that they were in the woods digging around the foundations of a house that was built in the 1700s. Isn't that what they said?
Probably.
Yeah, I
stone
think they
wall.
just refer to it as an old house. I don't think they say it's Rustin Parr's house.
Well,
Yeah.
I really should stop bringing up Book of Shadows, but in the sequel they
Yes.
do make
That's
you
made clear
remember
in
that.
the actual
It's
movie,
made
yes.
clear that the burnt down house is Rustin Parr's house, and that like things appear and disappear. Like there's a tree there that isn't there earlier and stuff like that in the sequel.
yes.
So I think that,
That's also kind of fleshed out in one of those Blair Witch books that I talked about, which I cannot find, so I can't say the title of. I just know that when I bought it, a used copy of it on Amazon, it shipped from the UK, and with it came a £4.99 ticket for the Blair Witch Project from from the cinemas
cool.
in 1999, which was cool. But I know that them finding out that was Rustin Parr's house comes really late in the investigation. And that was, or I should say Buck Buchanan finding that out, because that was actually something that Sheriff Cravens hid from the public for whatever reason. It is speculated by one local weirdo in Curse of Blair Witch that he is hiding stuff, but, we're kind of led to believe that she's just a wacko. But
who wrote those books? If I can.
oh, goodness.
I know.
I can find one of them, and I think they're by the same author, and I can find the wrong one, so let me just check.
I know the guy Ben Rock who did Burkittsville 7, and who also did The Shadow of the Blair Witch. He was like a PA. He did like a lot of the behind the scenes stuff on the first movie, and he wrote like this whole thing about the making of it. And I mean, that would make sense if he wrote it, but I've never read any of the Blair Witch books.
Okay, so these are by D.A. Stern. The books are The Blair Witch Project, A Dossier. That's the book that I've referred to so far. And then there's also Blair Witch, The Secret Confession of Rustin Parr, which I have not gotten around to, but I look forward to it.
Okay, now I've got a question for you, Patrick, because you got those books in
What's
your
that?
hand. How
Well, I've got
old are
one,
those
but yes.
books? When were they printed? Like are they relatively new, or did they come out in the
No,
late 90s?
they came out around the same time. I 99, 2000. Rustin Parr might have been a little bit later, but I'm pretty sure the first book came out before Book of Shadows came out. But
Now,
I'm not positive of that.
Can we just take the time to appreciate how much work went into building this fake story?
Oh yeah, that's one of the highlights of the movie, and I think it's the main highlight of the documentaries, just kind of appreciating the effort.
And it's how he got the actors on board, at least some of them.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, okay.
He told them the like mythology like it was real, and then said they were making a movie about that. And I forget who. I think Heather, and I'm sure another one of them thought that they were just like making a movie about a real like myth.
Oh,
Or not,
okay.
an established myth.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's genuinely impressive. There's even like small details. I mean, I think it's in the first documentary. What is it? Curse of the Blair Witch?
Yeah.
Where they're talking about the witch's name. What's her name again? Ellie something or other?
Ellie
Kedward.
Kedwards.
Yeah. That thing.
Kedward, yeah.
Where she sailed from Ireland on a ship, and she was on like a ship's log or whatever. And when she settled in the town, she was an Irish Protestant living amongst Catholics.
Other way around, she's a Catholic in
Living
a town
amongst
of Protestants.
Protestants.
But yes, I understand. Yeah. And so Professor Morehouse, a.k.a. Leonard Nimoy, speculates that, that explains why she was outcast, and there's nothing witchcraft about it. We also have to talk about another key character, Lucan Johnson, the television witch from
Okay, yeah.
what's the name of his show? He's got like a Wayne's World production level,
wish I
like
could
public
remember.
access television show.
It's really funny. It's like the most out of place part because like the sound quality is so much worse and
the video
everything.
quality.
Yeah,
Video quality.
Again, I liked it because it
I
is
like it too.
just this weird guy, and like watching this movie, the Rustin Parr stuff was well aged, black and white. It looked, it was passable as something that might have been in 1940 or 41 looked maybe a tiny bit, maybe sounded just a tiny bit too modern. This screams early 70s to me. I think this was so authentically done, and I love it. I love this guy, but he basically just exists. He just kind of explains witchcraft a little bit. He offers kind of an alternate explanation, possibly for what Ellie Kedward actually did, and he obviously doesn't think that she ended up haunting this town for centuries, but he's just in there. He doesn't interact with anyone because it's footage from the 70s, but I love the idea that there was just this witch television show in the 70s. I don't think that would have existed, but yeah, he's awesome.
On PBS.
Maybe WGN, but PBS is above that. But yeah, sure. So circling back to the discovery of the footage, because this is genuinely new information. I like the backstory of there's just an anthropology class found it, and this was like about a year after the students went missing, and then this like reopened the investigation. There's also a lot more of this. Again, this is just from the book, so I don't need to get into too much detail. But there is like, again, going back to Sheriff Craven's possibly hiding some things for whatever reason. He, for a while, only released some of the footage to the families, and people were wondering, what he was doing with that, especially if, we find out in Sticks and Stones a couple volunteer firefighters saw some of the footage, too, so...
He's having movie nights.
Yeah, so who's your favorite actor in these two documentaries? Or favorite character, or whatever?
To be honest, they're all pretty good. The only ones I didn't really believe were... Oh, actually, no, I'm thinking of the wrong documentary. No, never mind. I take it back. They were all pretty good.
Okay.
They're all passable and believable and, very History Channel-esque. So, yeah. I liked them.
Feck, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if... favorite actor is the right word, but I think Mike's brother was a very good choice.
I agree.
For the movie, because they don't look exactly alike, but you can tell that they're related in a subtle way to where you think wow, they got a guy that looks just like him.
Well, but yeah, and you also see all the old family photographs of the two of them hanging out, and that really lends authenticity to it too. Yeah, I think he's better than Josh's girlfriend. I wasn't wild about her. But I also am a big fan of the firefighter on the left. The old, I think he's kind of the older guy, the bald one, or the balding one from Sticks and Stones. And so let's talk about that scene, because that scene is one of the few things in Sticks and Stones that isn't in Curse. And Feck, you probably know more about this than me, but Sticks and Stones is directed by the two directors that did the actual movie,
right? Who
didn't direct Curse, or maybe one of them was involved in Curse. Do you know the relationship exactly?
So, I thought that they both directed Curse and Sticks and Stones, but I don't know how hands-on they were or what, because I know, the guy I was talking about, Ben Rock, had something to do with Curse of the Blair Witch. He probably produced it or something, or helped write it. But, it says that they both directed it, but I don't know exactly how much they did or who did what. But I know that the one that they didn't direct was the Burkittsville 7.
Yes, and that certainly has the most different feel. But
yeah.
So I was reading a little bit on this. Apparently, in the Blair Witch Project, they were originally going to have some other footage not of the students, or not taken by the students, to be included in the movie, and they decided against that. Mm-hmm. So I assume that's largely what makes up Sticks and Stones, if not Curse. And I noticed from editing the Face Off Blair Witch episode that the bits of the newscasters is in the trailer, so I assume that was probably for the movie originally. And also the other thing, this is in Sticks and Stones, not in Curse, but that one news reporter going up to Josh's dad and asking him if he thinks the occult may have had anything to do with his son's disappearance. So that was, I'm assuming, done for the movie originally. That I liked that scene a lot, but
yeah. I was just gonna say, I think you're right. I think that they filmed a lot of behind the scenes talking head stuff for the movie, and then when they decided against it, they decided to make a tie-in, like made for TV doc. I mean, also because they were so good at marketing this movie that they had so many people in on it. Like before it came out, there were so many people who were interested in, like, the website was up for like 5 years before the movie came out or something like that. And so they were able to sell a documentary.
5 years, wow.
It was something like,
I was going to ask, have you looked at the website recently?
I haven't, no.
I know the website doesn't exist in its current state, but you can find an archive version of it. Mm-hmm. It was just BlairWitch.com. Now you have to dig for it, but you can find it. It was a nice little throwback to early internet, obviously. One thing that I found really interesting was it had pages of Heather's journal to read.
Oh.
And which also make it into the book. But
gotta read
a couple takeaways from a couple takeaways. Well, I had trouble finding it on Amazon used from the UK, so good luck. But but yeah, a couple takeaways from that.
Funny enough, nobody's reading that book. That's why.
Well, it's out of print, obviously. This Blair Witch Project was a phenomenon. It isn't still a phenomenon, unfortunately. But a couple takeaways from Heather's journals. And this shows up a little bit in Sticks and Stones, that she's a believer in a lot of, like, New Age weirdo stuff. Because that doesn't really come up in the film. At least I don't think.
No.
And then also this was kind of funny to me. It's revealed that she's not paying either Josh or Mike, which I don't believe comes up in the film either. So it's funny they're out there risking their life literally for no money. And then also, she's a lot more frustrated in the journals with Josh than with Mike, which
is interesting.
Is interesting and kind of ties into what her film professor has to say in Curse and Sticks and Stones. Her film professor, Michael Dakota, who I can only assume is named after David, is talking about how he said Heather was one of his best students. Josh was kind of a slacker, and he thought they were a terrible match, but they seemed to like working with each other. But he also says he didn't know Mike at all. So it's an interesting another little plug for the book. But yeah, so Sticks and Stones has two big scenes at the end that are not in Curse. And the first of those is an interview that it specifically says it was done by Myrick and Sanchez, however you pronounce them, which I thought was just kind of weird because it's like, I thought in the context of this, weren't all these interviews by these guys? I don't know. But this is interesting to me because in the actual film, they are missing for how many days? 5? 4?
Yeah, 4 or 5. Like that.
Yeah. And, obviously, because we only have their perspective, we don't know of any search parties going after them, any concerned parents making phone calls. But this establishes that there was a search party actively out looking for them while they were still in the woods, or while they claimed to still be in the woods, according to the footage. And there were helicopters and everything. So this is more of that time loop stuff, or maybe not time loop, but just like weird stuff happens in these woods with the Blair Witch stuff. And I liked that as like just you let you think about it. Your mind can, do whatever it wants with that information. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, no, that is really interesting. I didn't know that. So I guess that I'm trying to think, like, would that have happened after 3 days or something how do you get there with helicopters that quickly? Like, that's kind of I feel like a week has to pass.
I don't know. I mean, are helicopters that slow?
Yeah, they're super slow, famously. No, I don't know.
No.
Turtles of the sky, that's what they call them.
That's what they call them, turtles of the sky.
Yes. But yeah, no, I like that idea, and then I also like these two volunteer firefighters. The guy on the left I really like.
You love these firefighters.
He's so natural. This is my favorite part of the documentary.
Yeah, especially the one on the left. Yes. Am I right?
Yeah, the balding one.
The older, uglier, balder one. But yeah, he's got this. They ask him like, "Did you guys find any clues or something?" And I like how he's just like, "Just a few beer cans, soda cans, just enough to make us thirsty." And he's like making a joke, but you can kind of tell he doesn't know how seriously he should be taking this whole thing because years have gone on. He doesn't know if it's a hoax. It might be a hoax. He's like not really sure what to make of it, and I just think that comes across really well in this fake interview for this fake documentary. This guy's awesome. Guy on the right's okay, whatever.
You know who else was pretty good? It was that like fat country bumpkin cop who was always seen wearing like his hat. He's like, I don't really. They were in the woods, and then we started looking, and he's like always fumbling over his words. Like, I don't know if they picked a guy who could barely read a script, but he did a great job as bumbling kind of country-ish cop,
Well, he's a central character, of course, in Book of Shadows. He's played by, obviously, a different actor because the Book of Shadows is a movie. It's a fictional movie. It claims in the Shadow of the Blair Witch to be a recreation of something that happened, but it's weird. You kind of have to see it to know exactly.
The Shadow Sheriff of the Blair Craven's, Witch is like, they're like, oh, it's a terrible like bastardization of a movie, but it's like promoting that movie, which I think is really weird.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that is a pretty accurate summation of what
this movie's terrible and it's evil and you shouldn't see it. It's like,
but anyways, go check it out.
Yeah. I think Sheriff Craven's in the Book of Shadows movie is like the funniest character. He has like a
he's
thick Southern prospector,
he's got that
voice. Sounds nothing or looks nothing like the guy who's like he's supposed to be playing, which is just funny because they clearly got people who were supposed to look like the actual actors from Book of Shadows, like with Jeffrey Donovan and all that. But they didn't even. It was a complete opposite with Craven's. It's really funny.
Well, and I remember there was a line in Shadow of the Blair Witch when they were asking. I don't think it's the sheriff. I think it's some deputy. But he's like, "Are you planning on going to see the movie?" And he's like, "Yeah, I think so. Just because I want to see who they get to play Sheriff Cravens."
That's right. I'm sure he was really happy to see that it's this guy who's going, "There's no goddamn Blair Witch."
And then he pulled out 2 pistols. He was like, "Get out of here, you rootin' tootin' varmints,"
Yosemite Cravens. That's what we call them, folks. But yeah, so the last scene of Sticks and Stones, after the famous firefighters, we get what I guess is just a deleted scene from the Blair Witch Project, which I actually thought was a really good scene. Does someone want to talk a little bit about that?
I'm struggling to remember what the scenes are, but I know that I liked it.
Never mind.
Because
I suppose I will talk about
that's the thing I really liked about Sticks and Stones was that they had deleted scenes, and I remember thinking they were really good, but I don't remember what they are right now.
Yeah, it's in the daytime. Mike is like breaking down. He's crying. He's praying, and then this is when he confronts Heather over like, how do you believe in all this weird crap that doesn't appear in the movie, but it's in her journal.
Right.
It's like, how do you believe this but not believe in a God? And he's like, God is gonna look after us. And what I liked about this scene, and maybe it would have hurt the pacing in some way if it were actually in the movie, but I liked a couple things in it specifically because I think it's a mic line, but they specifically say that they are documenting with the camera in order for whoever finds this to figure out what happened to them, which I don't believe is in the movie.
No.
No.
And I think I think this scene takes place, I suppose, the day that they, hours before they find the rusted powerhouse, because I think they say that they're going to shoot that night more, and they're going to shoot is it 8 or 16? They're going to shoot the film. and that's when they end up finding the house. So that explains why they have the 2 cameras rolling. Yeah. But they also, Mike specifically says that, Heather, this isn't your fault. He goes full Robin Williams. And what I liked about that in this scene is that in the famous monologue, I took note of this when I saw the movie most recently, but in the famous monologue, she's like, despite what Mike says, it is my fault.
Right.
But Mike never tells her that in the movie, so that's only in this deleted scene. So I thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah, that is cool. I remember thinking the same thing. It gives a lot of context to that final monologue.
Yeah, I would like to see it in the film. The film's not too long.
Yeah, I'd love to see an extended cut.
Just slide it in there. Yes.
Like I said...
because we know there was a ton of footage, and most of it probably wouldn't make the movie better. I think this scene might make it a tiny bit
better. The original
better.
cut was like an hour 40-something. It was like 20 or 30 minutes longer, and everyone who went to see it, like at some screening, was like bored to tears and hated it. And like... So, I mean, I think it's interesting. Like, they cut that down so significantly. I would personally be interested in seeing a longer version. I don't know how many other people would, but...
Now, do you guys think that if the Blair Witch Project had been bumpered on either end by...
Had been what? Oh, bumpered. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry. I thought you said like bungled or something.
Bungled. You think it had been bungalowed on either end. Yeah, if you think it had been bumpered on either end by people from the mockumentary, like shots from the mockumentary, do you think that would have made it even more believable in like a theater setting? Or do you think that would have just totally ruined the vibe of the movie, and that's why they have a whole separate series of mockumentaries about it?
I don't know if it would have ruined the vibe, but I think them doing it separately was the smartest call, because then the Blair Witch Project is completely like a standalone thing where you don't need to know anything. Mm-hmm. Like, that's kind of what's cool about it, is you don't need to know anything, and if it makes it more rewarding if you figure stuff out just by the context of it. And then then you got the documentary that aired on TV before the movie even came out that you probably already saw. And that's, I think it's cool that they're separate. But I mean, it wouldn't have hurt it that bad, but I think it's definitely better that it's separated.
I think I agree with that. I think there's a fun opportunity for like some kind of fan edit to kind of include details from these 2 documentaries and make it like just one longer film, include details from this within the film.
Right.
But I think as far as what the filmmakers are going for in this sense of helplessness with the characters and ambiguity, I think it certainly operates best the way it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
So another thing I enjoyed about the Sticks and Stones Blockbuster exclusive documentary was it starts out with blatant lies that are lies that are not only lies, in this, because everything in this is a lie because it's not real, but there's an additional lie to that because it says additional never before seen footage obtained by Blockbuster. And that's a lie because most of this is seen. It's in Curse of the Blair Witch, almost all
that's
of
great.
It. But I suppose the deleted scene is the never before seen footage. But still, those firefighters saw it. It's not never before seen. It's just not frequently seen.
Again,
it's
with
a lie.
these firefighters,
those incredible, beautiful firemen.
Balding, shiny head. Yeah, we get it.
Remarkable.
But yeah, so overall, I think these 2 documentaries, before we move on to the third one, really felt authentic. They feel like the kind of true crime garbage with a little bit of modern History Channel speculative fiction, I guess.
Yeah.
They feel authentic and they're entertaining. If you're not that interested in the Blair Witch Project as a movie and you just want mythology and the Blair Witch, Curse of the Blair Witch is definitely the way to go, but I also think these 2 work as, solid companion pieces to the movie, with Sticks and Stones really only the last 10 minutes or so, the deleted scene and everything really being all that new and fresh.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know a lot of people who don't like the Blair Witch Project who really like the Curse of the Blair Witch. I get it. Like the movie, the Blair Witch itself can be like kind of off-putting if you're not into found footage, and I mean, people can. I see why people would find it boring. Who wouldn't find the documentary boring? So it makes sense, but not to me. But
now for Sticks and Stones, did you guys find that all the cutting and the score over it gave you a fucking headache? I had the biggest headache after watching that one.
I didn't notice that. I mean, it should be noted, unless you saw a different version, Sticks and Stones, I'm just watching the shitty VHS rip on YouTube.
That's what I watched.
I'm sure maybe the sound quality wasn't as good as it was had I actually gotten it from Blockbuster. But
I didn't go to Blockbuster to get it?
No, not at the time. But I will say with Burkittsville 7, I think the score was kind of distracting to me. Not like obnoxious, didn't make me sick, but there's just too much score in Burkittsville 7 if I had a complaint about that before we move on to that.
There's a little bit of too much stuff in Burkittsville 7, I think, but we'll talk about that in a second. Actually, no, I'm going to bring it up now. Let's move on. Let's bring it up.
All right.
You know who I hate? The worst two characters out of all these mockumentaries is the guy who collects film reels. He's awful.
He's the best.
No, he isn't.
Chris Carrasco?
Listen, he's fun, but he's not believable. You know what I mean? And the sister, whatever her name is, she's bad too. At one point, doesn't she say, she's like, I want to choke him out, or I want to fucking deck him, or something.
Yeah, I want to punch him in the fucking face. That's like towards the end of the documentary. But,
and you're like, oh, yes.
Right.
And then she giggles.
Well, I'm just going to start off by saying the Burkittsville 7 is amazing. I love this. This is my favorite of the 3 documentaries, which sounds like it'll probably be a minority opinion.
It's not my favorite, but I agree that it's great.
Yeah,
I think it's almost
awesome.
just as good as Curse for me.
I agree,
and it's
as well.
completely
it's
different. Okay,
better than Curse.
It's completely different. It starts off with this guy that you're talking about, Chris Carrasco, who's a film archivist who basically just has a theory. And he starts off by talking about going over really briefly the events of the Blair Witch mythology, the Coffin Rock incident, which is the little girl that's taken, and then the search party is all killed and mutilated, and all the Eileen Treacle who drowns in the creek. He begins just briefly going over those and saying, there's other explanations. So he's skeptical of those. Then he moves on to the Rustin Parr incident, the 1940 incident. And this, of course, is his theory, and it takes a while to really get into it, but it starts with him just kind of going over that story, kind of the evidence, until he starts kind of poking holes at it. And I thought this is really interesting. I guess I don't know how authentic it feels, if this is something that would be in a real television documentary. I'll say he felt real. He felt like a real person. I don't know if he feels like a real person that would be involved in a documentary necessarily, but just the way he talked, his intensity when he talked about certain things, I thought was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I liked his intensity, but it almost felt like the intensity that doesn't belong in a mockumentary. You know what I mean? Or sorry, in a documentary. If that makes sense. Everybody else was pretty relaxed and certainly less animated than he was, and he just kind of cranked it to 10 or 11.
He's a wild card. You got to respect it.
Yeah, you know what? You got to respect a wild card.
He brought that energy.
In his defense, though, he's got this theory that no one is willing to listen to, except obviously in the context of this, someone's making a documentary about his theory, so someone's obviously listening to him. But he's just frustrated that no one will accept it. And then he genuinely seems, this is a bit odd, he seems surprised that Kyle Brody's sister doesn't want anything to do with him, even though he accuses her brother of murdering 7 people and also getting an 8th man killed, Rustin Parr. But so...
sorry, go on.
Well, I just wanted to say that it is so refreshing to see Bill Barnes in a different outfit in this one.
Finally.
He's wearing a yellow shirt.
Yeah,
he's not sitting at his desk.
Looks great.
Yeah, he is completely different. I also like that I could be mistaken, but I think this is the first time in any of these documentaries that Bill Barnes talks about his actual experiences from the time of Rustin Parr, because you look at him and you go like, obviously he's old enough to have been around in 1940. And so I thought it was kind of weird that he didn't really talk about that. He talked about his experiences with the old woman who was the little girl that got kidnapped by the witch that got the search party killed, but he didn't really talk about his Rustin Parr, Kyle Brody experiences until this movie. But of course, we got to say who Kyle Brody is. Kyle Brody is the one surviving Rustin Parr victim, the guy who was supposedly was made to stand in a corner while he mutilated other people, but he survived, and then he lived a very difficult life after that.
And a very naked life as well.
Very naked life, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So he spends most of his adult life, Kyle Brody does, in a mental hospital. And conveniently, we have film for this because there was a documentary, or excuse me, a nonfiction film, because the documentary filmmaker who made it does not like calling it a documentary, but he made a documentary, a nonfiction film exposing
White
Enamel, exposing how horribly treated inmates were, or excuse me, patients were in this criminally insane mental hospital. And most of this footage is awesome. It feels really good and creepy, and it feels like a weird experimental documentary from the age when everyone was on LSD. The exception of when they cut to that guy who's talking about how he's there because of Kissinger and Nixon.
Dude, that was my favorite. I love. Well, I mean, yeah, like it was ridiculous, but I loved the response. You know, I loved all of that. Because I can equate that to some retard talking about the national parks and the Wendigo, or like, quick sidebar here. I used to work with a lot of homeless people, and a guy came up to me one day. He needed a phone charger, and I was like, well, "What happened to the other one?" And he's like, "I'm telling you, man, the CIA, they spent $4 billion to cut all the phone chargers off my neck. They just swing down from the roofs and cut down all these phone chargers. And Obama, the former President Obama, is ordering out these attacks on me and my phone chargers." And I'm like, I'm digging whatever this guy's doing, man.
This was in, just a reminder, this was in Canada, right?
Yes, yeah.
A country not ruled by Obama. Okay.
No, so I was like, dude, whenever I hear somebody complain about politicians like that, or just have these crazy harebrained ideas, I'm 100% behind it, no matter what it is.
Okay. So, Feck, what did you think of White Enamel?
I thought it was one of the, probably the best part of the documentary for me. It was certainly, like, it's the most memorable, I think, because, like, when I threw it back on, that was the one thing that I, like, definitely remembered was that whole segment, because I remember it's compelling. I mean,
I like how they have like a film historian on there to talk about it a little bit. Like that was awesome.
And I just like this whole documentary because it's like kind of separate from the Blair Witch thing and from like, you know,
I agree.
The movie. It's just like its own documentary. And it's kind of weird, like it's not something that needed to exist. It's probably not something people were necessarily clamoring for, but I'm glad they made it. I like it.
Yeah. You know, that's a good point. Like it came out at a weird time. It came out, I think, like a couple weeks before, like I think maybe a month before Shadow of the Blair Witch and then Book of Shadows. Like just kind of weird timing. Like, was this just an attempt to get Blair Witch on people's minds again?
Probably.
But if it is, talk about a risk, starting it off with a guy basically saying the Blair Witch and the Blair Witch Project are bullshit, because he even says the students are playing some kind of sick joke, and I love
they say that stuff in Curse too, kind of. I mean, some people do. There's some
I know.
skeptics.
Yes, they speculate. This guy is just Chris Carrasco is just like, no, he's not beating around the bush. Like Sheriff Craven suspects it's a hoax, but he's just like
Craven.
You know, it's weird, but yeah, this guy is just like, it's just a sick joke. People trying to people trying to talk about the Blair Witch and stuff. I mean, it's like, oh, this is
again,
awesome.
That's what I like about Shadow too. Is they're like Book of Shadows is just like this crappy, terrible, like tacky movie. It's like promoting that movie. It's just really funny. Like they talk about that movie like it's terrible, and I mean, people would come to think that it's terrible.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a lot of the actual reviews
right.
on Book of Shadows shared those sentiments.
And it predates that. It's like they knew going in. Like, I'm sure Ben Rock or something like watched Book of Shadows and was like, "Oh, this is awful," and so had like as many people say that they hated it before it came out to like kind of save face or make it look like it's tongue in cheek or something. I don't know.
It was intentionally bad or something. Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, I like Book of Shadows.
But yeah, so back to White Enamel. We find out that White Enamel was filmed at the hospital where Kyle Brody, the naked, overweight, surviving Rustin Parr victim, was held.
Okay, we don't have to bring his weight into this, but I agree.
Well, he's very round. He's spherical. He looks like the Syracuse Orange mascot.
Well, luckily his belly's covering his penis in a lot of shots, so that's good.
Yes, maybe that's why they cast him because he is naked the entire time. But yeah, so he has this kind of chilling scene, and this is in the context of this. This is actually in the White Enamel film. He's just naked in a corner, saying "never given" over again. The phrase "never given." I think he only says it like 2 or 3 times. Carrasco says that he says it like over and over and over again, which he doesn't, at least not in the footage that we saw. But according to Carrasco, and this is information that was not provided in any of the other documentaries, supposedly that same phrase was uttered numerous times one night by a Rustin Parr while in prison. So weird connection here, and this really got my brain rolling. Like, okay, what does this mean? Because they don't even speculate as to what it means.
Right. Mm-hmm. Did you make like a bulletin board with like string and a million different pieces of paper?
Well, I made that Venn diagram.
Yeah.
But,
Pepe Sylvia.
Yeah, Pepe. Yeah. So yeah, never given. It's also revealed at some point that the former priest. Well, I want to talk about, and this will tie into the priest too, but Chris Carrasco, the narrator of this documentary, essentially, he is an unreliable narrator, and I like that the film includes people saying, well, not just the sister, but it includes other people saying, like, yeah, this isn't good investigation. Like, they have that one photo analyst who's like, no, you can't look at that with a hypothesis already in mind. You have to look at it fresh and then formulate a theory on top of it, which he didn't do. But he says a few things that are not verifiable, even in within the documentary, because he says that he's the only one who we hear about Rustin Parr saying "never given." He says that he heard it from like a guard, but there's no verification of that, and he could just be making that up. And then, yeah, and then also I think when he's talking about Kyle Brody's life after some of the stuff that he says about Kyle Brody is accurate because it's ties into what the psychologists say and stuff, which, by the way, bold move to name one of the psychologists Dr. Fraser. I thought that was interesting.
He's listening.
In the year 2000. Yes, he is. But because... And then the sister even mentions that he did take the legs off of a frog and stuff. But then some of the other stuff he's talking about, like, oh, he's the only one, of these 8 kids that were kidnapped. None of them, they didn't all know each other. The only thing they had in common was him. That is not remotely verifiable. And
no.
In fact, if this is in 1940 in a small town, I would imagine probably everyone knew everyone, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like contradicted within the story itself. But this is Jim. This is why I like this guy. He's a crazy weirdo. He's got the bulletin board and all that stuff, and it's fun just seeing him do his thing here.
I mean, you have the bulletin board too. I mean, that was more in depth than I think anyone's ever gone into this movie.
Dude, he's got a bulletin board and books and a poster of a balding fireman.
You've got the dossier. I've never even
seen
that.
I'm looking at a poster of Babe Ruth calling his shot. Okay, that's not a fireman.
It's close.
Close.
But yeah, so, but there is this priest figure, a former priest, who heard Rustin Parr's confession, and eventually, towards the end of the documentary, he reveals that Rustin Parr didn't or he said he didn't kill anyone.
Yeah.
Again, this comes only from Carrasco that Rustin Parr is a simpleton. He claims that he's illiterate. No one else in the documentary claims that. Bill Barnes went to school with this guy. I don't think he's illiterate, but and also, would an illiterate man be smart enough to say, like, hey, I confess this thing to you. You can't tell anyone because you're a priest, and that violates the... Like, that doesn't seem like a simpleton thinking to me.
But again, with this mockumentary, they do a great job at having people kind of contradicting each other's statements, right? So it is all left for you to pick and choose what you want to believe and what sounds the most factual. But you're right. Like, he is putting a load of bullshit out there.
I mean, I think then that's also, like, especially the case for, like, Curse of the Blair Witch, because when that comes out, there are still a lot of people who thought it was real. So, you know, you'd probably have, like, teenagers watching it thinking it's real, and then, like, their parents are seeing it thinking, like, this is just bullshit. Why does my kid believe this shit? So, yeah, like, so, you know, so...
This was, the Blair Witch Project was Slender Man before Slender Man in my hometown of Waukesha, Wisconsin. Right. Of course, when those two girls stabbed their best friend dozens of times. That's pretty much what the movie Book of Shadows is about. But yeah, so this, goodness, what was I going to say?
Wait, is the prequel to Book of Shadows What We Do in the Shadows?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good.
Only the television series,
show,
though, not the movie.
Oh, okay.
Movie's unrelated. No, the prequel is Shadow of the Vampire, starring Willem Dafoe.
That's right. And John Malkovich is F.W. Murnau.
Is that who's in that? Yeah, I couldn't think of who the other guy was.
Is Blade part of this universe as well, or are we gonna? Okay,
of course.
No, but Blade Runner is.
Oh, okay.
Not Blade, but Blade 2.
And Blade the Iron Cross.
Blade the Iron Cross.
Blade the Iron Cross, the Puppet Master.
Listen, as long as Chris Christopherson's in our universe, that's fine with me. Okay.
Him and Ron Perlman with the bald cap on for the second one.
What about Tracy Lords?
Yeah, Tracy
she's
Lords
only in the
there.
first one, I guess.
That's right. Well, Stephen Dorff also in there from the first one. They actually wanted Stephen Dorff to play Heather in the original.
Oh, I heard about that.
Yeah.
He ended up playing the villager who talked about Rustin Parr.
Yeah, he played the old
guy.
Man. He's just wearing a lot of makeup.
So, with this Chris Carrasco guy, I do think he has some genuinely compelling evidence. I think he fails to understand causation, like correlation causation sometimes, because he talks about Kyle Brody's life after the thing as evidence of what he was capable of before, but really that could have been caused by the trauma of being kidnapped by Rustin Parr and witnessing all these murders and stuff. But supposedly Kyle Brody testified about a kidnapping that occurred before he was with Rustin Parr, so thus that's evidence of Kyle Brody actually being involved directly in the kidnapping and killing. So I thought that was interesting, and it's like, okay, if that's real, real in the context of if this were a real story, that's really interesting. But then I think what he thinks is the big bombshell is Rustin Parr being illiterate, which I think is debatable. But then also the footage, when he finds extra footage that wasn't included in White Enamel but was shot for it, of Kyle Brody writing right to left the witchcraft language, supposedly Transitus Fluvii. And this is what I mentioned earlier. This is what is written on the walls of the Rustin Parr house in the crime scene photographs, and also at the end of the movie. We know from Book of Shadows that is the Rustin Parr house, but in the context of the film, that house no longer exists. But we do see Transitus Fluvii in the Blair Witch Project film. And this is really interesting to me because it's this like witchcraft, it's this cult language, and Chris Carrasco says, like, okay, this guy's writing this now, so that means he was intelligent to have written it all over Rustin Parr's house. And then but I think weirdly this to me makes a supernatural explanation the most logical in the Burkittsville 7 case, because why does a 7-year-old kid know a witchcraft language? this complicated witchcraft language that only one philosophy professor is fluent in, or whatever, you know?
Right.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part about this, is that he comes to the conclusion that, oh, well, he must have murdered these people and he has some occult knowledge or something, but and this whole Blair Witch thing is a hoax. He's just killed a bunch of people. But really, and for us, and I would assume the audience watching, we're all like, oh shit, he's like possessed by a witch or something, you know? That is the case for supernatural phenomenon existing in this world.
And does Never Given have something to do with that? Maybe, I don't know. Do the sexy firefighters have something to do with that? Possibly.
Get off of these firefighters already, or get off to these firefighters.
I can't quit these firefighters. But yeah, so any other things to talk about with Burkittsville 7? I loved it. I think it's awesome. I've watched it like 4 or 5 times now. It's on YouTube. Go check it out.
I think it's great. I agree. I think it's definitely. I don't know. I like Curse a little more, and I also really like Shadow maybe a little more. But other than that, I think it's right there.
Okay.
I mean, it's no
Jim,
Scooby-Doo
thoughts?
project, but it's still.
Yeah. See, but is it better than the Blair Witch Project though, with Joe Bob Briggs? Probably.
Probably, yeah.
Unless you're a big Phantasm 2 fan. Which,
or Child's
Phantasm
Play
2 is
2.
pretty
He
great.
also did Child's Play 2.
Yeah, that's right. So, Jim, thoughts?
Yeah, Curse was a really fun watch, really interesting. And Burkittsville 7, also cool. If you were going to skip any of them, I'd skip Sticks and Stones, except for like the last 5-10 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, I would recommend watching that deleted scene. And that's kind of all that has, because it's mostly the same footage.
At least it's only like 30 minutes. At least it's the shortest one.
Yeah. It's not. It is short. Yeah, the other ones are both about 40.
Yeah.
Well, and also too, like, if you're super into the Blair Witch Project and the whole lore, I mean, fucking watch it. But like, who would be watching this stuff now? You know what I mean? Like, would
Us,
anybody?
damn it.
Well, yeah, exactly. Other than us.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's no point in not watching Sticks and Stones, because if you're already watching all the Blair Witch things,
that's a
like,
good point.
what's 30 minutes of your life for Sticks and Stones? And there's some good stuff in it, you know.
Exactly. Yeah,
Your life's already being wasted. Go check it out.
Which is why I think maybe we should have thrown the Scooby-Doo project into this. You know,
maybe.
What's
Except
like,
Jim knows this. I do not watch cartoons. I guess you said it isn't.
It's
cartoon,
live action
though,
cartoon.
Yeah. Okay.
It's all live action footage with the cartoons on top.
Is it like Evil Tunes?
Yeah, it's kind of like Evil Tunes, except in the
Roger
woods.
Rabbit.
Now it's only 15 minutes. I'm just saying.
Oh, I'd watch it. Yeah, 100%.
One last thing I would like to say about the documentaries as a whole and the Blair Witch mythology as a whole is one thing I absolutely love about it is that each individual incident, which all come at about 50, 60 years apart, which is something that even Professor Leonard Nimoy says he can't explain, and he's the ultimate skeptic, of course, of the people talking about this. But one thing I really like is that you can take any one of those events, the Eileen Treacle drowning, the Rustin Parr murders, and say, okay, that had nothing to do with the Blair Witch, but maybe the other things still did. And that, to me, makes this lore so much more compelling and interesting and provocative and believable.
Right.
Is that you have all of these things that might individually be explained, and we hear multiple explanations of some of them, but all of them together, it's like, well, can we really explain all of these things? I don't know. I just really like that. I like that each of the documentaries kind of touches upon that idea.
Yeah, I agree.
And same for me.
You're running this one. You brought the bulletin board out. We can't compete.
Exactly. I know. Yeah, I was like, well, I watched these movies and I rewatched
It's a
Blair
Venn
Witch
diagram.
And, you know,
you have the
It's a Venn
fireman on your
diagram
wall
with like 8 things written in it.
I'm sitting here with a cup of tea, and Patrick's got a fucking like team of people behind him,
He's got
printing off sheets and handing them scripts to read.
He's got a fireman
Do you
calendar.
think Bill Barnes is still alive?
No.
I hope so.
I was thinking
Yeah,
that just
no.
now because I did just watch because
he's like 75 20 years ago, 23 years ago.
Oh, shit. Yeah.
Because I watched like some of these like a few weeks ago, but then I for some reason thought Shadow of the Blair Witch was going to be discussed, so I put it on right before we did this. And Bill Barnes is in that one too. And I was thinking, oh, there's no way this guy's still alive. It was 22 years ago.
Is he the only returning character from Curse and Sticks and Stones in Book of Shadows?
I think so.
I guess
Craven's
maybe.
But
yeah,
probably other than that. It's funny because even in Shadow of the Blair Witch, they still show clips from the Blair Witch Project, like as if we don't know them by now.
Yeah.
They also did that that fake newsreel stuff really well too.
Yeah, they did.
You mean like the news anchors?
Yeah, I don't know if they were like real anchors, but they did a great job.
Yeah, they have a very John Beard Arrested Development feel to them.
Honestly, and yeah, like they were great in Curse. I think that's one of the things that's lacking. And I think at this point I'm basically reviewing Shadow of the Blair Witch, so I'm just gonna say that I think that was one of the things that's lacking in that one is that the news anchors were not as believable, and like the editing of like the text on the screen just looked more fake.
Did they use Comic Sans or something?
No, but it's like it looks like someone just roughly like 10 minutes just put together a news thing.
That's too bad.
But I mean the actors weren't bad, I guess, but it was more of the presentation of it. But I think Shadow holds up.
Yeah, and I think the acting is good in these three documentaries, and I think the presentation is very, very good.
I mean, not as good as Scooby-Doo Project, but still pretty good.
Maybe not. But there's three documentaries. There are two very, very different feels to them. Sticks and Curse are more or less the same thing, presented in a very similar way. But that at least feels authentic in and of itself, and then same with Burkittsville 7, delivered in a much different way.
And Shadow is pretty much exactly the same as Curse and
okay.
It's the same
I know
vibe.
I've seen it, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for joining me, you two.
Thanks for having me.
And
you too.
For those of you listeners / watchers on YouTube, be sure to let us know if you liked this video, because we might do some more things like this. I don't know. This is kind of a first for us.
Give us all the downvotes.
Yeah, you should. Yeah.
You didn't talk about Scooby-Doo Project. We got to downvote it.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, it should have been the center focus.
Me and you could
Maybe.
do like a cartoon or like Evil Toon sort of thing, because Patrick doesn't watch cartoons. We could review all the Scooby-Doo movies.
There's so many.
Aren't there like 40?
There's probably more than that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Zombie Island, though. Classic.
Oh, classic.
I've heard good things about Zombie Island. It doesn't mean
they go to New Orleans, and that's where I'm from.
Oh,
no way!
nice.
Are you really?
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Dude, that's awesome. I'm not.
You know who else is from there? Jerry Lee Lewis.
Of course.
Pervert.
Jimmy Swaggart.
Wait, who is Jimmy's? I've heard that name.
He's cousins with Jerry Lee Lewis. He was like a televangelist. He was like...
Oh, he was a real person? That sounds like a joke. That sounds like a movie character.
Yeah, but he's not the cousin that Jerry Lee Lewis was banging, though. And that's
No, yeah, that's a good point.
No,
yes, because
he was banging just random, I think, ladies of the night.
he's banging 7 gram rocks.
He's banging 7 gram rocks. That's how he rolls.
Yes. Dating this video like crazy. But all right. Thanks for joining me, folks, and we'll see you guys next time.
Does that all make it in, that last part?
100%. This is staying in, too.